Aloha. We're here in Waikiki, and today we're going to do a tour of the shoreline of Waikiki, a Kaʻahele ma Waikiki. We're starting off here in Kapua, and we're going to work our way through several land areas all the way down to the Moana Hotel. So from Kapua, we're going to go to Kaneloa, then to Hamohammo, then to Ulunio, and that will conclude our tour. Waikiki is a pretty unique place. People don't realize that it's actually a bay because we don't use that term. We don't use Waikiki Bay or the Bay of Waikiki. But Diamond Head at the east end of Waikiki, at the Manaʻe end of Waikiki, actually forms the eastern boundary of the bay. And then it continues all the way down to where the Sheraton Waikiki is. That bay was formed by the wetlands that used to be behind the beach. Waikiki was a barrier beach between inland wetlands and the ocean surf spots. Waikiki is a world-famous name, but most people probably don't know what it means. Waikiki is actually two words in Hawaiian, wai, which is fresh water, and kiki, which means to spout or to bubble up. Back in the day, there were a lot of wetlands in the rear of Waikiki Beach. There was a lot of upwelling of water, fresh water, and those were the bubbling springs, the spouting springs. Most of those springs that used to be here in the wetland have all been filled in. And it goes back to the 1920s when the Alawai Canal was dredged. That canal started being dredged in the early 20s and it was completed in 1929. All of the fill from that dredging was pumped into Waikiki, and almost all of the springs were covered over. So Waikiki is one massive landfill, and all of the hotels here and everything else are built on top of that fill. When you're swimming or surfing in Waikiki and you hit a patch of cold water, those are the springs of Waikiki. That's the upwelling of fresh water. There's also a couple of places right here on the tiny little beach here at Kaneloa where you can still see the fresh water bubbling up through the sand. Kapua is where local residents access the ocean when they want to come to Waikiki. So you'll find everybody coming through the beach here, whether they're ocean swimmers, surfers, bodyboarders, stand-up surfers, canoe paddlers, kayakers, you name it, they all come through Kapua. Kapua means the flower, but to a native Hawaiian, Kapua was also a buoy. It was a buoy that you placed in the ocean for a surf contest. Hawaiians did a different type of contest than we do today. For them, distance was everything. And the way you did a contest was you paddled out to sea together, you waited in the lineup, and then you both caught the same wave. And whoever went the longest distance was the winner. The kapua, the flower, was the finish line buoy. And that may be one of the interpretations for the name here in Waikiki. The Hawaiian ali'i loved Kapua. It was one of their favorite surfing spots in Waikiki. And there's an interesting story that goes along with this particular surf spot, Naluo Kapua. It happened in 1809, and that was when King Kamehameha I was actually living here in Waikiki. His favorite wife was Kaʻahumanu, and the king found out that she had a brief affair with his nephew, Kanihonui. When Kamehameha learned about the affair, he ordered the death of Kanihonui. Kanihonui was put to death and his body was placed on Papaʻenaʻena Heiau, which was a very well-known temple in Waikiki that was on the slopes of Diamond Head Crater. Kaʻahumanu was really upset with what happened, and to grieve her loss, to help her get over the emotion that she was feeling, she got a group of surfers, an entourage together, and they came here to Kapua to surf. There on the beach, she could see Papaʻenaʻena Heiau, and they could also go here out to the waves and surf. So there's a very strong tie all the way back to the days of Kamehameha and Kaʻahumanu of this particular surf spot and this particular beach. One of the big differences between traditional Hawaiian surfing and the sport right now is that back in the day, surfing was a national pastime. Everybody went in the water, from the maka'ainana, the commoners, to the ali'i, to the royalty. Now, when the ali'i went in the water, the makainana and everybody else would clear out and give them space. In fact, in Waikiki, there were certain areas reserved for the ali'i whenever they were there. But the bottom line is that everybody enjoyed the sport. It didn't matter who you were, man, woman, child, senior. Everybody loved to surf. Everybody got in the water and rode the wave. Back then, everybody believed in party waves, as we call them today, or ohana waves. Everybody caught the wave together, and that was really a lot of fun. That was part of the national pastime, was sharing waves with other people. The more the merrier. This was something that was very attractive to the Hawaiians, was being able to surf with family and friends all in the same wave. Native Hawaiian surfers were no different than the surfers of today. They named all of their surf spots. So we know now that Kapua is called Old Man's, but there are other surf spots out here in Waikiki that we've learned the Hawaiian names of. The one that we can see is Tongs. That's what we know it as today. The Hawaiian name was Kaluahole, and it means the hole of the ahole fish. The other name we know right in this stretch of shoreline is Aiwohi for Publix. And then there's our famous offshore break, Kalehuawehi, which we call Castles today. Kalehuawehi means the lehua lei that was removed. And the mo'olelo, the story that goes with the name, is simply this. There were two surfers, a man and a woman, that were paddling around Waikiki looking for a good spot to surf. The man was wearing a lei. He was wearing a lehua, or a lei made out of lehua flowers. When they got out to the spot where they were going to surf, the woman asked the man for his lei. He took it off and put it around her neck. So Kalehuawehi, the surf spot, was named for that gesture, that romantic gesture of taking off his lei and giving it to her as a neck lei. One of the important things about the lehua is that the lehua is actually the flower of surfing. In one legend of Laie Kauai, who the town of Laie on the North Shore is named after, Laie actually presents a surfer, a man, with a lehua to reward him for his excellence in surfing. The English name today for Kalehuawehi is Castles. The Castle family had a home right out here at Kapua. They built a home here in 1898. It was a 3-story structure, just actually a mansion on the ocean. They called it Kainalu, which means ocean wave. Non-Hawaiian surfers who were out there at Kalehuawehi, they used the castle home to line up the surf spot. So they began calling it Castles. That happened right about the turn of the century, and the name Castles has stayed with that surf spot ever since. Castles is a big wave surf spot. It only breaks when the south swells are just giant. They have to be breaking at 10-foot plus faces, and then Castles really starts to work. It's a really long wave, and on a perfect swell, Castles will actually connect all the way into Waikiki Beach. That ride is almost a mile long, and one of the most famous surfers to make that ride was Duke Kahanamoku. Duke was born in 1890, and he made that ride when he was in his late teens or early 20s. The surf historians differ on the date. But anyway, the Duke caught a massive wave at Kalehuawehi at Castles, and he rode it standing all the way into Waikiki Beach, and he fell, and these are in his own words, he fell where the Duke statue is today at a spot called Queens.
You have some very large surfboards, haven't you?
Yes, I have one that's 16 feet long and about 23 inches wide. And
now, how does that compare to the usual surfboard that the surfers use today?
Those they use today is a little bit too light. And I guess they got into it and they like it better. But I prefer the big board.
You prefer the big board?
Right.
You made your own board, didn't you?
Yeah.
Big one here a while back?
I did that myself.
How did it turn out?
You see what it is.
Well, this is the actual board here,
yeah,
the one you made.
That's the one that you've heard so much about riding it for a mile and an eighth.
Oh, yes, one wave, a mile and an eighth.
That's right.
How heavy is that board?
114 pounds.
114 pounds.
Right.
And here's a shot at the end with the big, tall surfboard.
Yeah, that's what I call it, ehukai.
Well, if you had your choice, would you have rather lived your youth back in the old days or have lived your youth today?
I would prefer way back.
Live the old days. All right.
Right.
Thank you, Duke, and many more happy years as Hawaii's greatest representative.
That ride can still be done today, and other people have done it. George Downing, for one of our legendary surfers, has made that ride. Wally Fryseth has. There are a number of other people that have made the same ride, and not only on surfboards, but also on bodyboards, paddleboards. Someone even did it on a Hobie Cat. As non-Hawaiians began to use the beach and the surf spots in Waikiki, they came up with English names. They also came up with English names for the beaches. The name of the beach here at Kapua has changed a number of times over the years. In the late 1890s, a man named Hebert built some seaside cottages, and he named them Sans Souci. That's French for without a care. The name of Kapua changed then. It changed to Sans Souci, and that's what it was known as. In fact, a lot of the older residents here on Oahu still call it by that name, Sans Souci. In the 1970s, a hotel was built right here on the shore of Sans Souci Beach, and it was called the Kaimana Beach Hotel. In fact, that's still its name today. Kaimana in Hawaiian means diamond. In the early 1800s, some of the sailors that got off the ships here to come and visit Waikiki went hiking on Diamond Head. It was known then, of course, as Leahi, its Hawaiian name. Leahi means the forehead of the ahi fish, and if you look at Diamond Head from the ocean, you can see very clearly the forehead of the ahi and actually the first dorsal fin, which is the highest peak of the ahi fish. They hiked on Leahi and they found these quartz crystals. The sailors thought they were diamonds. They thought they'd made a wonderful discovery. They renamed Leahi Diamond Hill. When the Hawaiians heard that, they imitated the words Diamond Hill. They called it Kaimana Hila, which means Diamond Hill. So when the hotel was built here in the 1970s, they took the name Kaimana and used it for the hotel. That name became the name of the beach. So now we've gone from Kapua, Sans Souci, Kaimana Beach, which is what it's known as today. Kaimana Beach as we know it today is the shoreline of Kapua. And Kapiolani Park is actually a park of hundreds of acres. Kapua is just a small portion, the eastern portion of the park. The majority of that park is Kaneloa, which is the next land area going west. King Kalakaua dedicated Kapiolani Park in 1877, and at that time the park was really well known for two wahipana, two famous places in particular. One was the Lina Poi Poi, and that was the racetrack. Horse racing was really big in the 1800s, and when they dedicated the park on Kamehameha Day in 1877, horse races were the major activities. But King Kalakaua, having his love of ocean sports as well, he actually put on a surfing contest, but the surf was flat, so nobody got to surf. But interestingly enough, there was actually another competition held in Lahaina on the same day to honor Kamehameha Day. They had enough waves there that there were actually 3 winners, 2 men and 1 woman. Coming back to Kapiolani Park, the largest section of the park is Kaneloa, and that's again several hundred acres, and that's where the second famous place was located. It was called Maki'ailana, and Maki'ailana means Maki's Island, and it was actually an island within the wetlands in the park, and people went there to a bandstand where they listened to concerts. Kalakaua named the park after his queen, Queen Kapiolani. Here we are at Kaneloa. Kaneloa is the largest section of Kapiolani Park. It goes from Kapua just about to where Kapahulu Avenue is today. This part of the park was best known in the 1900s as the public baths. The public baths were actually a public facility that was built here on the shore of the park for the public, for local residents. The only remnants of the old public baths are some of the seawalls that are here fronting the walkway. The name has really been captured in the surf spot offshore. It used to be called Aiwohi. That was the traditional Hawaiian name. But in 1908, when they built the first public baths here, the name, of course, changed. People used a landmark on the beach to mark the surf spot, the landmark being the buildings. They started calling the surf spot public baths. So Aiwohi got lost. The name got shortened over the years to Publix, which is what it's called today. As you go further offshore, you hit the edge of the reef, and that reef curves. It actually circles right into Waikiki. Now you can see that Waikiki is actually a bay, and people don't realize that, but this bay, this amphitheater of surfing, has some of the best surf spots on the entire South Shore. Publix is one of them. The wave at Publix is a left, and it just follows this curving reef right in towards the center of Waikiki. Waikiki offers every type of ocean recreation you can imagine. That's one reason that it's such a famous beach and that it's so well loved by visitors and residents alike. Everything you want to do in the ocean, you can do it here. Swimming, surfing, bodyboarding, canoe paddling, canoe surfing. If you think about it, Waikiki is the only place in the world where you can ride a wave on an outrigger canoe every day of the year. Whatever you want to do in the ocean, you can do it here in Waikiki. Native Hawaiians did 6 different surf sports: surfing, he'enalu, canoe surfing, pakakanalu, body surfing, kahanamoku, sand sliding or skimming, he'eone, river surfing, he'epu'iwai, and paipo'o, bodyboarding. Right now we're standing inshore of 2 of the famous paddleboard riding spots in Waikiki. Straight out from us is Publix, which was known as Nalu o Aiwohi, Aiwohi Surf, and the other spot was Nalu o Maihiva, which we call Kunas, and that's straight out from the famous wall at the intersection of Kapuhulu and Kalakaua Avenues. These 2 spots have waves that are perfect for the paddleboard, and Native Hawaiians rode these small boards out there just like the paipo riders do today. The word paipo seems to have originated here in Waikiki, and it was actually pronounced originally paipo'o. It was spelled P-A-E-P-O-O. Pai means to catch a wave and to ride it to shore. Po'o is your head. So paipo'o means to ride a wave head first, in other words, to body surf. And it's been shortened over the years to paipo and finally to just paipo, which would be an English pronunciation of it. So paipo'o was used here in Waikiki to mean body surfing, along with the other term that's used for body surfing, which is kahanamoku. People started using small boards as they body surf, so that's your papa paipo'o, your body surfing board. In the mid-1950s, surfing legend Wally Freusseth was really into paddleboarding in addition to board surfing. Wally started making boards commercially to sell to family and friends. And he actually designed a decal that said Paipo, P-A-I-P-O. He didn't realize that it was P-A-E because nobody had ever spelled the word before. He was just spelling it how he heard it. So Wally made these decals, he put them on his boards in the 1950s, and that P-A-I-P-O became our word paipo that we still use till today. What we're looking at today are 2 modern paipo boards, the 2 boards in the middle, and 2 older style paipo boards, which are the boards in the end. This particular shape that you see here on the 2 boards in the middle, this teardrop or guitar pick shape, this came about in the 1960s, and most people now regard it as the traditional paipo shape. That's what you see. It was popularized in the 1960s by a man out on the North Shore named Val Valentine, and he started making these boards commercially out of plywood, and he called them paipo nuis, and he sold them for about 20 bucks. If you look at these boards, the width on these boards, to actually get this from a tree trunk, you would have had to had a really big tree with a huge circumference and a really wide diameter. This style of board with this kind of width didn't come around until we had modern materials like plywood and like fiberglass. So the old style boards are more tree trunk shaped. This one on the end is made out of, actually laminated out of redwood and pine. Now Hawaiians couldn't do that. They couldn't laminate because they didn't have the glue and they didn't have fiberglass and resin, of course. So the two boards on the end, even though they have traditional shapes, they're laminated with modern glue. One of the big attractions of riding paipo boards is their speed. The boards are either flat bottomed, or they have a very slight rocker, and they don't have any fins. So with that flat bottom and no fins, the boards just fly. When you get out here on a big day at Publix or over at Kuna's, you get those long, really long walls, and the boards just take off like a rocket. So flat bottom, no fins, that's what makes them work. Paipo boards are also used as skim boards. In fact, they were actually the original skim boards. They're small, they're flat, and they're very good for skimming across the beach. There's old footage from the 1930s that actually shows someone skimming on a paipo board, and even more exciting, skimming on a pillowcase. And probably even more exciting than both of those, someone just skimming on his chest. That sport was called he'eone, and that means sand sliding. Today we call sand sliding skimming. So the traditional art of he'eone was to race after a receding wave, dive out on your two hands, and then launch onto your chest. And you would just skim with your body only, just skim right on that receding wave and go back out into the ocean. Now the really unique sport is pillowcase surfing or pillowcase skimming. When the big hotels came to Waikiki, the Moana in 1901, the Halekulani in 1917, the Royal Hawaiian in 1927, the beach boys, the Hawaiians that were working at the beach services, realized right away that you could take a mattress cover or a pillowcase, catch air in it, and hold one end of it when you caught air, and then you could run and skim, just like you were skimming on your chest or on a paipo board. They also figured out that you could take that same inflated pillowcase and go out to sea with it and turn around and catch waves. Pillowcase surfing was really popular from about the 1930s through the 1950s. The best bag rider, as he used to call it, as opposed to pillowcase, was a man named Al Santos. And Al, with his Churchill fins, would go out and surf the biggest waves at Sandy Beach, and he would go out on the biggest days at Makaha and ride his pillowcase all the way and up on the beach. Pillowcase skimming and surfing and paipo skimming and surfing started to fade away in the 1970s. That's when Tom Morey introduced the foam bodyboard. He called it a boogie board. People still call it that today. The boogie board, the foam bodyboard, completely replaced the pillowcases. It completely replaced the wooden bodyboards. One of the biggest changes to traditional Hawaiian surfing happened in the 1950s. That was the introduction of foam surfboards that were covered with fiberglass. Those foam boards revolutionized surfing. They were lightweight, they were cheap, they were easy to carry. They put surfboards in every backyard throughout the Hawaiian Islands. The wood boards, the old plank boards, hollow boards, the traditional Hawaiian surfboards, all of them started to fade away in the 1950s. By the 1960s, foam boards were at every surf spot in Hawaii. Today it's really rare to see paipo riders. I would estimate today that there might be 50 paipo riders who still ride the old wooden boards. Out of the 6 surf sports that Native Hawaiians did, The one that surprised me most was river surfing. In Hawaiian, it's called he'e pu'ewai. He'e means to surf, to slide. Pu'e is agitated, and wai is water, fresh water. So what the phrase means is that you're actually surfing the agitated water of a river that's running, usually when the river is flash flooding. The best place to do it in the Hawaiian Islands is here on the island of Oahu, and that's at Waimea Bay out on the North Shore. When that river runs out there, it forms stationary waves within the river. And the kids will stand on the side of the river, actually on the sandbank there with their bodyboards. They'll just hang onto their board and launch right into the wave. The rides are quick, they only last for about a minute, and then that stationary wave will die out, another one will form. River surfing is also done on the neighbor islands, on the island of Kauai, on the island of Maui, and on the Big Island. I got the information about river surfing from the Hawaiian language newspapers. There are a lot of accounts of he'e pu'ewai that go back to the 1800s. And the Hawaiians are saying that we're here in the rivers, we're riding these stationary waves, and they're enjoying it just as much as surfing a wave out in the ocean. Waikiki was famous for a seaweed called limu lipoa that has a real strong fragrance, and you always see that in the old Hawaiian language newspapers. They talk about the fragrance of the lipoa in Waikiki. Lipoa still washes up, particularly here at Kaneloa. The reefs out here still have a lot of the traditional limu. I've actually found vavaiole here, lipoa, and manawea. Those three limus, which are favorite edible limus, come up here at the beach in Kaneloa. As I walk up and down this beach, as I've gone over it over the years, I've seen a lot of shell collectors looking for shells here. They're not big, they're small. A lot of them are just tiny little cowries, but they are shells from Waikiki Beach. The same seaweeds that people like to eat also attract turtles. This end of Waikiki is one of the popular places for turtles to come in and feed. And they'll actually come in right up to the edge of the seawall here and feed on the limu that's on that shallow little reef. The other place in Waikiki that turtles come in is on the opposite side of the bay, and that would be right in front of the Sheraton Waikiki. That's another famous turtle grounds for Waikiki, and you see a lot of them there. They come in into the really shallow waters, feed on the limu on the reef there too. The sand here is actually original sand from the offshore coral reefs. And it might sound kind of simplistic to say that, but you have to realize that most of the sand in Waikiki has been brought in from other places. In fact, if you really take a hard look at the South Shore in general, we have artificial shoreline all the way from Pearl Harbor to Diamond Head. Lots of landfills, lots of introduced sand, lots of seawalls, lots of groins, you name it. The shoreline is almost all artificial. So this is one of the few spots in Waikiki where the sand hasn't been introduced, and it's just the sand that's being generated from the ocean eroding the coral reefs. Right now we're at the west end of Kapiolani Park. That also means that we're at the west edge of the land area known as Kaneloa. Kapuhulu Avenue and the Kapuhulu Groin, which is behind us, are like the boundary between Kaneloa and Hamohammo. Hamohammo is the next land area going west. This particular spot, the Kapuhulu Groin, was built in 1951. But as soon as it was built, all of the kids that swim and bodyboard here renamed it the Wall. This is probably one of the most popular bodyboarding spots in all of Waikiki. Before the foam bodyboards came in the 1970s, this was a very popular spot for paddleboards, for wooden bodyboards. There's also a deep water break, a deep water surf spot that's straight out from the wall. It only breaks when the South Shore is big. That spot is called Kunas. The Kunas were a Waikiki family. Their family home was right over here at the corner of Kalakaua and Kapuhulu Avenue. So the spot was named for them. And the Kunas were also a surfing family too. Kuna's was called Maihiva. So Naluo Maihiva was the name that Hawaiians called this particular surf spot. Right now we're in the center of Kuhio Beach Park, and Kuhio Beach Park is on the shoreline of the land area called Hamohammo. So we've transitioned going west from Kaneloa and Kapiolani Beach Park to Kuhio Beach Park and Hamohammo. Hamohammo was owned by the Queen Liliuokalani. The 4 streets in Hamohammo that are associated with Queen Liliuokalani are, first of all, Paoakalani. Paoakalani means the royal fragrance, and that was the name that she gave to her home here in Hamohammo. The next name down is Ohua. Ohua means retainers, as in the Queen's retainers. She had cottages the length of Ohua Street, running back Mauka. She had cottages for all of her retainers. That's where they lived. The next street coming down is Kealohilani. Kealohilani was the name of her beach cottage, and then the last street, the 4th one, is her name, Liliuokalani. So those 4 streets define Hamohammo here in Waikiki. Prince Kuhio made his home on the shore of Hamohammo. The name of Prince Kuhio's home was Puʻalelani, and that name isn't captured in any of the streets here, but we still associate it with Kuhio Beach Park, Puʻalelani. When he died in 1922, the city, the territory at that time, acquired his beachfront property and turned it into a public park. That's why it's called Kuhio Beach Park. Kuhio was a famous surfer, and he surfed right here in Waikiki. From the stories that I've read about him, he actually had a pulley system under his house because it stuck out over the ocean. And he had his heavy olo, which is a very long, heavy koa surfboard. He had it on this pulley system under the house, and when he wanted to go surfing, he would just drop down over the wall, lower the pulleys, launch the board, and take off to Queens or Canoes, wherever he was going to surf. When Prince Kuhio was a young man, back in the 1880s, he and his 2 older brothers went to a military academy, a school, in California. One summer in 1885, the 3 brothers took a break and they went to visit a family friend in Santa Cruz. When they got to Santa Cruz, they saw surf. They went to a local lumber yard, they picked out some redwood planks, and they shaped themselves 3 surfboards. They went surfing in Santa Cruz in 1885. So to surf historians around the world, they are acknowledged as the first 3 surfers to actually surf outside of Hawaii, and it happened in Santa Cruz, California. The ali'i loved Waikiki. Out of all of the places to surf in the entire 8 Hawaiian islands, this was probably the most favorite spot of all. They loved it here, they loved the waves. You could not only board surf here, but you could canoe surf as well. And within this bay, within this amphitheater of surf, you have some of the best breaks on the South Shore. When there's a good-sized swell running in Waikiki, there are dozens of spots to surf here. The Hawaiians surfed them all. They loved it here. When Waikiki was still a wetland, there were 2 streams that drained the wetlands that crossed Waikiki Beach. The first stream on the Diamond Head side was called Kukai'unahi. And Kukai'unahi stream came right through Ohua Avenue, which is just inland of where we're standing. The other stream was Apua Kehau. Apua Kehau entered the ocean just past the Moana Hotel, right between the Moana and what's now the outrigger Waikiki. Here where Kukai'unahi entered the water, it cut a little stream channel through the reef. You can still see that channel till this day. Otherwise, the shoreline in here is completely changed. We're standing on a seawall. There's another seawall that's perpendicular to this one. These walls were put in here to trap the sand that was placed on what was originally a rocky reef and a small little sea cliff over here. Those streams were very important. They were very important to Waikiki. They helped to keep the reefs clean, and they attracted a lot of fish to the Waikiki area. It was the old food chain thing. A lot of the seaweeds like brackish water. They like that mixture of fresh and salt. So again, getting back to the food chain, you have your basic, which is your seaweeds. Fish feed on that, bigger fish, etc. So that stream doesn't exist anymore, and Apua Kehao doesn't exist anymore. Both of them were cut off when the Alawai Canal was dredged. When Kukai'onahi stream still flowed through Hamohammo into the ocean, there was a body surfing spot here. On the west side of the stream, where the stream entered the ocean, there was a sandbar, and all of the kids in Waikiki would come here to body surf and to ride their little paddle boards. Right now we're at the west end of Kuhio Beach Park, and offshore this end of the park are two of Waikiki's most famous surf spots, Queens and Canoes. Queens was named for Queen Liliuokalani. She had a cottage on the shoreline in Hamohammo. The cottage had a little pier in front of it. She liked to sit out on her pier and watch the surfers. In the early 1900s, there were two young boys that were regular surfers at Queens. When they saw that the Queen was already there while they were surfing, they named the spot Queen Surf after her. Now that name has moved to 1946. Back in Kapiolani Beach Park, there was a restaurant, and that restaurant took the name Queen Surf. When the restaurant was finally demolished in the 1970s, the name Queens Beach was left over there where the restaurant is. So right now we have Queen Surf here in the heart of Waikiki, and at the east end we also have Queens Beach. The Queens Canoes area was called kapuni, Naluo kapuni. The Hawaiians preferred canoes because, again, going back to what they like to do, they like to ride distance, and canoes will give you that. In fact, that's why it's such an excellent canoe surfing spot, because you can go way out to sea on a canoe, pick up the bumps, and then just ride all the way into shore, literally right up on the beach. So the ali'i and all of the other surfers loved Waikiki for that, because you could get these really long rides on their old heavy boards and in their koa canoes. Queens, which was just on the Diamond Head side of Canoes, part of Kapuni, they consider it to be a secondary spot, and that's because it's a very short ride. Queens, though, tends to be a little steeper wave, and for that reason, the body surfers liked it. So Queens, up until about the 1950s, early 1960s, was still a traditional body surfing spot in Waikiki. But once the foam boards came in, they kind of took the spot over, and the body surfers all moved. They all headed up towards Diamond Head. The name Kapuni, Naluo Kapuni, the surf of Kapuni, is like other place names in Waikiki. It's also reflected in the streets. So if you go back into Waikiki, just inland from the park where we are, you'll find Kapuni Street, named in honor of Naluo Kapuni. There's also a legend that ties into the name Kapuni, and it's a legend of Kapai Mahu. Kapai Mahu was one of 4 healers that came from a distant place, in other words, outside of the Hawaiian Islands. The Hawaiians just called it generically Kahiki, which we would probably say Tahiti today. There was Kapai Mahu, there was Kinohi, there was Kahaloa, and there was Kapuni. So Kapuni was not only the name of the surf spot out there, but also the name of one of these traditional healers. The healers were here, and they were helping the people. And when they decided to leave the Hawaiian Islands, they asked if the people in Waikiki would go up to Kaimuki and get 4 large boulders to be placed here in Waikiki as monuments to them. Those 4 boulders were actually brought here. 2 of them were placed in the water, the ones for Kahaloa and the ones for Kapuni. The other 2 were placed in the sand dunes on the beach. In the 1900s, those 4 stones were recovered, and they sit now right next to the Honolulu Police Department substation. One of the most interesting stories about Kapuni, canoe surf, has to do with Princess Kaʻahele. Her home was here in Waikiki. It was called Ainahau. She lived there with her parents. And she was an avid surfer. All of the old timers in Waikiki talk about her and her prowess in the ocean. She was a wonderful swimmer. And on the big days at Waikiki, no fear. She would just get out there and surf with the best of them, the biggest of the waves. She was also an avid canoe surfer too. She loved to ride waves in a canoe. In 1898, a man named Burton Holmes came here. He was from the continental United States. And Burton Holmes created something that he called travelogues. He would go around the world for part of the year and take slides, take photographs of all these different places. And then during the winters back on the mainland, when everybody was frozen and cold, he would go to auditoriums and people would come from all over to see his photographs of all these different places around the world, all the things that he'd seen. Very successful at what he did. In the late 1890s, we have movies. Film comes in. Burton Holmes jumps on it, and he starts traveling around the world with a movie camera and a small crew. In 1898, Burton Holmes comes to Hawaii. He lands in Honolulu. While he's here with his film crew, he gets invited to a luau right here on the beach at Waikiki. There's 100 people there, if not more. The man that put on the luau arranged, after everybody was through eating, he arranged for all of them to go for a canoe ride. One of the invited guests was Princess Kapiolani. Burton Holmes gets in the canoe with the princess. He places his cameraman on the beach, and these 5 canoes take off. They go, and there's surf. They go out, they catch waves out at Kapuni, and they surf in. His cameraman catches it all. Surf historians believe that that footage of the princess and everyone else canoe surfing in Waikiki was the first surfing movie ever made, the first film of surfing ever made. That film went back to his collection, the Burton Holmes collection. Surf historians have gone to that collection to see if it still exists. They've been told that the film was irreparably damaged and that it can't be used at all. So unfortunately, we know of the film, but we don't have it. We started our Kaʻahele ma Waikiki at Kapua, which is at the foot of Diamond Head. Then we followed the shoreline through Kaneloa, Hamohammo, and now we've arrived at Uluniu. Uluniu means coconut tree grove, and Waikiki was famous for its coconut tree groves. Perhaps the most famous was the grove at Helumoa, which had thousands of trees. And there was another one just to the west of that at Kawehiwehi, where the Halekulani Hotel is today. The shoreline of Uluniu was called Uluko, which means the ko-tree grove. Uluko was exactly where the Moana Hotel is today. And it was a very famous spot because that's where all the ali'i came. It was directly in from the surfing spot Kapuni, which is where the ali'i love to surf and canoe surf. And it was very close to Apua Kehau Stream, which was just to the west of the ko-tree grove. So they had everything here. They had the surf, they had the sand beach, they had shade in the grove, and they also had fresh water to rinse off after they came out of the ocean. People refer to the beach here as Waikiki Beach, but actually back in the day there wasn't a Waikiki Beach. That place name was for the Ahupua'a, for the land division that ran from the shoreline all the way back to Manoa Valley. Specifically, we're in Waikiki Kai, that's Waikiki on the ocean. And Waikiki Kai was from the beach back to about the Alawai Canal. From the Alawai Canal back to Manoa Valley was Waikiki Waina. Everybody knows this beach today as Waikiki Beach, but the Hawaiians had another name for it. They called it Kahaloa. And Kahaloa was the sandy strip that runs, in today's terms, from about the Sheraton Waikiki down to the Duke's statue. With the exception of Kapiolani Park, Waikiki is primarily high-rise buildings. Obviously, it's not what it was back in the day. But the spirit is still here. The same waves are still here. The beach is still here. Local people gravitate to that, just like the visitors do. I was born and raised here on the island of Oahu, and my family lived very close to Waikiki Beach. I actually learned to surf right here at Canoes when I was 8 years old. I've been surfing here ever since. So Waikiki is very close to my heart. I've made it a point over the years to try and learn all of the Hawaiian place names that were here before Waikiki was commercialized. To me, the place names are very important. The place names reflect the culture at the time that they were given. So if you understand the mo'olelo, the stories that go with the place names, you'll have an insight into Hawaiian culture. You'll be able to get an idea of what the Hawaiians were thinking, what was important to them, what was happening back when the place name was given. So when you're here at Waikiki Beach, when you're in the water, swimming, surfing, canoe riding, whatever you're doing, I hope you enjoy it as much as our kupuna did, as our ali'i did. My name is John Clark. Aloha, ahui ho.
Aloha, everyone, and welcome to Bishop Museum. I'm DeSoto Brown. I'm the Bishop Museum historian, and I'm the curator of the Archives Department. And we're here to take you on a tour of a recent exhibit at Bishop Museum called Mai Kino Himai, which means from the beginning. It's a look at Hawaiian surfing. And with me is the premier Hawaiian surfing historian, John Clark. John, what was so special about this exhibit?
Bishop Museum has the most fantastic collection of traditional Hawaiian surfboards. And for the museum to put these boards on display in Mai Kino Himai was, for me personally, a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Let's talk about what was the traditional process of creating a surfboard in Hawaiian culture.
Hawaiians call traditional surfboard making kalai papahe'enalu. Hawaiians made their surfboards from trees. They'd go into the forest, select an appropriate tree, cut it, and drag it down to the beach where they shaped it. The traditional way Hawaiians made boards was with 4 different natural materials: wood, stone, shell, and bone. They would start with an adze, which is a wooden handle with a sharp stone tied onto it, and that would be their axe to rough shape the board. To finish the boards, they would get stones, including coral, which was rough, and that was their sandpaper. So they would use stones to plane the board, to sand it, and to completely finish it.
Where do we get this information from?
We get this information from the Hawaiian language newspapers. They started back in 1834, and they ran all the way till 1948.
What kind of woods were used to create traditional Hawaiian surfboards?
There were 2 types of woods that were used for making surfboards. The first was koa, and koa is a dense wood. It's heavy, so that meant it was very durable and it was long-lasting. Wili wili is the second type that they use for the traditional boards, and wili wili is just the opposite. It's a very lightweight, porous wood, and that was one reason they liked it.
So now that we know what kind of woods were used to create surfboards, let's look at some of the actual boards which were here on exhibit in Bishop Museum. And we're going to start with probably the oldest existing surfboard in the world. This is in the Bishop Museum collection, and it is thought to have belonged to a chief of Waianae, Oahu. It could date back to as old as the late 1700s. And if that's the case, then it predates the arrival, possibly, of Westerners to the Hawaiian Islands. And that's very important because this would be an example of a surfboard made entirely by Hawaiians for Hawaiians before there were any outside influences at all. This board is also noteworthy because of the finish that it has. You can see that the wood is dark, and that's because it's been finished with soot from kukui nuts. Kukui nuts were burned by Hawaiians traditionally to make light inside, usually halipili. And the light was very dim, and what you ended up with, of course, were burned kukui nuts that were black. That blackened soot could be mixed with oil or other types of substances, rubbed on the surface of the board to help make it waterproof. That's why this board is black, and that's an excellent example of a Hawaiian tradition.
The Hawaiians had names for the different types and sizes of boards. Papali'ili'i, which means small board. Papa is board, and li'ili'i means small. Those were boards that were used primarily by children. The next size up would have been alaya, and the next size up after that would have been kiko'o.
This surfboard is particularly important because of who it belonged to. You may have heard of Princess Kapiolani. She was a very beautiful princess, Hawaiian princess, who died very tragically at a young age in 1899. This surfboard came to Bishop Museum from her father upon his death in 1910, and it's very thin, it's very delicate. It was made intentionally so that it would be easy for her to handle. She wasn't a very big person, so the surfboard that she would have used would have to have been something that was easily carried by a young woman.
The sides of the board, the rails as we call them today, those thin rails would bite into a wave. They would hold in a wave, especially a steep one. So that makes this 7-foot plus board a very maneuverable board, which would have been very fitting for Princess Kaʻahele.
John, thank you so much for all the information you've shared with us.
My pleasure, DeSoto. You're welcome.
You know, here in the Mai Kino Himai exhibit at Bishop Museum, we have learned so much history. But even though there have been so many different changes, one thing that has not changed is that the thrill of surfing is still very much with us.